Hello my lovely friends and welcome to a new tutorial. I'm really excited to post another tutorial after a little bit of a break and I hope that you really like this one. So in this one we are painting this golden hour pine forest with these beautiful heather plants that have these pink flowers. This took me about 2 hours, and if you want to see the whole process from start to end in real time, I have that real time painting video on my Patreon page. And speaking of Patreon, I post exclusive tutorials there every month, so even if you don't see a tutorial here, you should definitely join the painting club tier on my Patreon if you want to see more of them. So first I started this whole process with a sketch, and I was looking at my reference photo to just kind of map out some specific areas in the painting so I would know wherever my painting stroke should go. And again, if you want to see a more in-depth look into what I'm doing here, I will have the real-time version on my Patreon. I know that everything is very sped up in this video, but this was a pretty long process, and overall I would like to say here in the beginning that this took me I think over 2 hours plus obviously brainstorming for the ideas. So this is not going to be the simplest painting. I actually struggled with this surprisingly much. Even if I'm teaching you how to paint things, it doesn't mean that I'm always amazing, and I just trust my own skills so much. I am oftentimes very much doubting if a painting is going to turn out good, and let me tell you, it was a big struggle with this one. Overall, I think that this kind of painting will require you a lot of patience, a long time obviously. So yeah, just keep your expectations low and just try to have fun with this one instead of trying to make it exactly like my version or the reference photo, and I think that you will enjoy the process a lot more that way too. But after I was done with the sketch, I taped the edges of my painting and I started with an underpainting. So I basically just used a lot of yellow and a little bit of red paint to make this pretty bright orangey yellow underpainting color, and I just coated the whole area of the painting with it. If you're not familiar with underpaintings, it's basically just a color underneath your color set you will add later. It will help you with creating a more uniform color scheme and just overall help you find the right tones for your painting. And especially for me with this notebook, I think that it also helps me a little bit when I wet the paper beforehand like this, because oftentimes when I don't do this, my strokes on top will be a little bit more streaky. So this also helps me, but if you're using a different notebook, this might not work at all, because in my normal notebook, I actually cannot do an underpainting because it will just soak the paper completely. But anyway, after that I started with the initial painting. So I just used some white and a little bit of yellow to create this background color for the sky here behind the trees. I had already sketched some of the biggest trees in my painting, so I was adding this lighter sky color in between all the sketches so that the tree sketch would still show through later when I start painting them on top, so I know where I would be adding them in. At these stages of my painting process, I'm usually looking at my reference photo quite a lot, just trying to see where you can actually see the sky in the back. Obviously, I'm adding this a little bit more than what you are going to be seeing in the end, but I just want to make sure that we have all the areas covered in the end. And now to that same sky color, I mixed a little bit of olive green and yellow to make this very subtle olive green color to make some of the trees in the background. Again, I was looking at my reference photo, just trying to map out what kind of colors we have in the back here. All of these details that we are adding now will not show through that much in the end, so don't worry about making any perfect details and making sure that this looks amazing. It doesn't have to. And then for the next layer, I mixed in some more black and olive green to that same color just to create some little details for the trees in the background, just so that there would be some sort of texture in them as well. And I also used my damp brush to just kind of blend the edge of those two colors, the sky and the trees, so that it wouldn't be so blocky and sharp. But now we are starting to make the initial leaves and the treetops in the back. So I mixed together some olive green, some white, and some yellow, and a little bit of carmine, this kind of red color, to just make this warmer and earthier tone with the green paint. I don't often add red into my green paint, but that's definitely a great way to make your colors just a little bit warmer and a little bit more brown, and it will just kind of ground it a little bit, which I really like. I was using my older Filbert brush. I use this quite a lot, even though this is pretty frayed and not super, precise anymore, but I like to use it in areas like these when we are starting to add some messy leaves in the back. It just really works for this one. I was adding these random shapes of leaves in the the back, just making sure that we still have some of that sky color peeking through. So as you can see, I'm adding some more of these denser areas of leaves, and then I'm making sure some of the areas in the leaves and greenery are a little bit more sparse in the edges of those blobs that I just added, just to make sure that it would look a little bit more realistic and we would see the sky color coming through. In that reference photo, it looked like the photo was taken maybe during like a golden hour, so I wanted to make sure that these colors that I was adding here were pretty warm, so the golden hour look would just come through perfectly. So when I started adding a little bit darker colors, I also tried to make sure that I add that carmine in, so we would then just have this more warmer tone to all of the colors with the greens. I have to admit, at this point I was a little bit confused about what I was doing. I felt a little bit rusty, and I often feel that with forests. I don't know why I feel like this all the time, because I paint forests quite a lot. I still really often struggle with them whenever I start with the paintings. I don't know what it is about them, but I think that having all of these elements and these leaves in the back and the treetops, it just feels a little bit confusing, and just like there's so much going on that it's hard to kind of just translate that to a painting. But overall, I think that many times they actually turn out really good. It's just hard to judge it when you are in the stages of, you know, just starting this painting and kind of being scared that it doesn't look exactly like the reference photo. I was mixing some more white and yellow to these green colors and adding that to kind of closer to those areas where the sky is showing through, just to make sure that it just looks like there's maybe sun shining and some little golden leaves in the edges of these blobs, which are these groups of leaves here. I was also at this point using a much smaller brush, as you can see. So after that initial layer of me using that messier Filbert brush, I went in with a more sharp tipped round brush to just create a little bit more precise details and brush strokes on top of the ones that are in the back, since obviously when we're coming closer to us as the viewer, we start to see things a little bit more sharp. And as you can see, I'm adding some darker colors in between some of the lighter tones, just so we can have some depth and just some interesting look to the trees in the back. I was again using my reference photo and trying to see like what kind of colors we have going on, but I did not necessarily look at it and try to see all the spots where we have these darker areas and things like that. So I would highly recommend you to kind of approach this tutorial as well in that same way. So you can get the general like pointers in this video, but don't try to make every single brush stroke the same as I do. Obviously this is very much a sped up video anyway, but I think that it's good if you use this as a general idea of what you can do, and then just kind of take that knowledge into your own painting where you can use your own creativity a little bit more. But now I wanted to go to the ground instead of painting the treetops, so I mixed in some olive green, yellow, carmine, and also white and black. I have to admit that with this ground, I was really just mixing colors together. I was also using a lot of water with this painting overall. As you can see, none of my color mixes are really like solid and a little bit thicker. They're all very watery, and I sometimes like that because it gives me a little bit of freedom when I can kind of blend things together with water. You can see some of that orange underpainting coming through, and it will just make some of the areas in, for example, this ground a little bit more dimensional, if that makes sense. So I'm really just kind of winging it with this ground, especially. I'm just adding colors on top of colors, just trying to make sure that we have some kind of depth variation in this ground. As you can see, I'm making some areas where we have a little bit more shadow, so I'm just trying to make sure that it looks like there's these almost individual bushes inside of this, but also I'm going to later on very much coat this whole area with flowers, so you cannot really see these details so well, but I think that it's important to make some sort of color variation here because it will just make it look a little bit more interesting, and it will just create that depth in this painting in the end. I mixed in some yellow and some red so I could add some of that to the treetops that we just painted. I was looking at my reference photo and I noticed how much more golden the whole look with the treetops were, so I wanted to add some more of that orangey color, especially to the middle section of the trees in the top, just to make sure that we would have that golden hour moment come through perfectly. And I actually think that this really helped with the painting overall. I was feeling like the trees were a little bit flat and just did not have that same beautiful look as the reference photo, so this orange color definitely helped. Along with green colors for the ground, I also added some more reddish and yellowish brown colors to the ground as well, just so we would have that orangey vibe coming through with the ground as well, so it would all just be balanced and just like a uniform little scene, and I really like that. I have to admit, this whole painting is definitely a little bit different from what I usually do. I mean, I paint a lot of forest, but I think that this particular forest painting is very different from my usual style, but I definitely enjoyed painting this. I have to say that obviously in the end I'm adding the flowers and the plants. I think it's called a heather plant, and I actually have lots of these flowers near my hometown, and I often go there when I'm mushroom foraging in the end of summer and in autumn, so it definitely felt kind of familiar to me, and I just was thinking about mushroom foraging this whole time when I was painting this, and I still am while I'm editing this video. I cannot wait for autumn this year. But as you can see, I made that little orangey brown color for the pathway in the middle, and then I started adding in some shadows, especially along the edges of the pathway. I have to say that this pathway was probably the trickiest part of the painting because I did not have my usual raw umber color. I had run out of that, so I was pretty much just using, you know, reds and yellows and blacks to create different kinds of brown tones. But I definitely struggled with this one, and I noticed that the colors that I was adding and the details and the shadows that I was adding on top of the pathway just looked a little bit weird. So I was kind of like praying that it would just come together in the end. Even though I'm not a huge fan of this part, I think that this, if I have to say my least favorite part of this whole painting, that maybe would be this pathway right here because of the weird colors that I ended up adding. But I was just adding some shadows onto this pathway with my smaller brush and creating these lines going across the pathway and just adding some little dots here and there. Maybe there's just little rocks and pebbles on top of the pathway, and obviously some of the trees are also casting some shadows onto here. So I was trying to keep that in mind while I was adding these shadows on here, and I also obviously thought about that when I was adding the highlights as well. But again, not my favorite part. I think that it would have been better if I had like a raw umber color, just like a solid normal brown tone that would just kind of pull this whole painting together a little bit better, but I had to improvise with the colors that I had here at home. But I wanted to leave the pathway for a little bit, and then I wanted to start and paint the tree trunks. So for this one, I was using black, white, and then different shades of brown and red, just to make sure that we have a little bit more of these warmer toned gray tree trunks. I was again a little bit struggling with this color because I was looking at my reference photo and trying to make the color kind of similar, but it felt really unnatural to make these grayish tree trunks because obviously usually I go for something like more brown tone, but I think that it actually ended up working pretty well. As you can see, again, I was using very watery paint layers. I don't really even know why I did that. I guess I felt lazy about adding more colors onto my palette and actually making more thicker paint mixes. But anyway, I was really just making these layered, and I think that especially the trees that I made in the back were very, very simple and not at all detailed. So I was at this point pretty much just making little lines from the top to bottom, especially trying to make sure that we have this nice full forest with all of these trees. So I really was just adding a lot of them here, and I think that this part definitely made me trust this painting a little bit more because I really started seeing it come together with the tree trunks, because before this it looked a little bit bare. I also mixed in some more orange and red to that same color when I was extending the tree trunks to the top of the painting, to the area where we had some of those orange leaves in the tree tops. I wanted to make sure that those areas of the trees were also kind of sun-kissed and just a little bit warmer so they would fit to the scene a little bit better. But now I'm starting to add some color to the trees in the front as well. And again, I was really just mixing all kinds of colors for this one. And I know that in the real-time video as well as this one, it's a little bit of a confusing step for sure, because I'm really just going in and pretty much just dipping my brush into every single color on my palette. And I apologize for not being a little bit more organized with this step, because I definitely understand how this could be really confusing. But I basically, with the tree trunks, wanted to make sure that the bottom was a little bit darker, and then again we would have that not super smooth but a little bit smoother gradient going with this lighter orange color in the top, just to make sure that we would again have that golden hour feel in this painting. Overall, I wanted the tone to some of the trees to be a little bit more gray instead of super vibrant brown, for example. So with pretty much all of my color mixes, I had some black and white mixed in as well, which often makes the colors a little bit more dull, which in this case worked really well. What I would like to say about my color mixing, especially since it's so hectic and unorganized, is that I know that it is probably really helpful if a tutorial is really organized and you can see all the colors really well and it's just really straightforward and simple, unlike this video. But I also just want to say that I think that it's actually very helpful if you try to kind of do things on your own as well, instead of just like staring at what a teacher is doing exactly. I think that one of the most fun things about painting is exactly that, like just doing your own thing and not having to fully copy something that someone else is doing. Again, if you're a complete beginner, I totally understand if you would like to have a more clear demonstration on what exactly to do. But I'm also saying that if you're watching this video and if you end up painting this yourself, you have the creativity in you to also not stare at this video and make everything exactly like I do. I know that you can figure out your own color mixes even if they are not exactly the same as mine, because that is also the fun part of painting, that you can actually do whatever you want. And even if it looks a little bit weird in the end, you probably learned a lot more about that painting process because you did things on your own. I think that one of the most important things for me when I started was buying this mixing set of colors. So instead of having a million different colors already mixed for me, I actually had to learn a little bit of color theory so I could then just kind of play with the colors and then see what turns out. Having to do that really helped me to be where I am right now, because now I have a little bit more knowledge in color theory and color mixing, and that really helps me with all of my paintings and creating a uniform color scheme as well. I added more contrast and darkened the trees by adding a little bit more black onto the tree trunks in the bottom. I actually realized that the shadows that I added were a little bit all over the place, but if I would do this again, I would add all of the shadows to the tree trunks onto the sides that were farther away from the pathway. So for example, on the left side, I would add the shadow onto the left side of the trees as well, if that makes sense. To accentuate that golden hour look even more, I mixed together some yellow and some red to add a little bit of a highlight onto the tree trunks into that spot that was kind of closer to that middle section of the sky showing through. And I also added a little bit more white onto that as well to add that special highlight onto some of them. But obviously now our trees are pretty bare, so I wanted to add in some more texture onto the tree trunks. And I actually found a really fun way to do this without having to spend too much time on this. So basically just mixed together some white, some black, and then some brown, again to just keep things cohesive and a little bit warmer. So then I was using my brush without adding in any water, and I was just kind of dragging my brush along the tree trunks to create these fun dry brush textures for the trunks. And I actually think that this turned out so good. Again, it really didn't take me that much time at all, and it just really worked and made it look very interesting and textured without having to spend too much time on creating these individual dots and whatever onto the trunks. And yeah, I would say that I'm pretty proud of this detail. It really worked out well. I also added some more final shadows onto the treetops here. I unfortunately didn't really film this so you can see it pretty well, but I just wanted to add some more darker areas there as well now that this whole painting was coming together, as I felt that some of the areas looked very light still, so just adding a few more spots here and there. Then I mixed together some black, scarlet, and yellow to create this darker brown tone, just to add some little branches onto the tree trunks. I was just adding them here and there onto the top of my painting to just keep everything interesting. But now for some of the final steps, I'm obviously adding the heather plants that have these beautiful pink flowers. Overall, this flower again really reminds me of my mushroom foraging trips, because in forests like these, I have often found some Boletus edulis mushrooms. So yeah, it just gives me really good memories of last year when I found a lot of them. I actually especially remember finding a big one just straight under some of these plants that I'm painting here. So yeah, just getting these lovely memories in my mind here. But I was mixing together some white, some carmine, and a black together to create this very muted grayish purple tone to the flowers. I was just kind of using this as an initial base for the flowers. I often do this when I'm painting any sort of flower fields or anything with flowers really, that I'm making the initial colors a little bit darker in tone, because these are the areas that are more in the shadow. Because even if you look at a forest like this, not all of the flowers are hot pink, even though if you are looking at some of those flowers individually, they would show through with having this very vibrant color. But if you're looking at it in a forest, obviously the forest floor itself will have more dark shadowy spots, and the flowers will also be a little bit darker in those areas. So I'm trying to add the first layer of flowers here with this more grayish and darker tone, and then I'm mixing together some more carmine and white to just kind of brighten that color up a little bit with each layer. I'm creating these flowers in a very messy and loose way. I'm not really focusing on making some super detailed and sharp little dots. I'm really just adding them everywhere with kind of the tip of my brush. Again, it really does not look super detailed, but I was kind of happy to keep it a little bit more loose here in the end, as I had already spent so much time on this whole painting. And I think that it actually works, because if you look at that reference photo as well, there's a lot of flowers and all of them are kind of clumped together, so you are not really able to see any individual flowers here anyway. But as you can see, I was just then adding some more of that carmine and some white to create a little bit more brighter pink flowers here and there, just to keep everything interesting. And I was also adding some even darker spots with some carmine and black, just to add some more shadowy parts to the field. But with that, we have reached the end of this painting tutorial, and I have to say that even though it was a struggle at times, I really had so much fun with this painting. I hope that you also really enjoyed this video, and if you ended up working beside me and making this yourself as well, I hope that you had fun most importantly. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, like the video if you like the video, and leave a tree emoji down in the comments so I know you watched until the end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye.